Last week we looked at Tian Tao's back squat and what you could learn from the different aspects of his squat. This week we're going to take a look at an athlete who is in a similar weight class to Tian Tao but built very differently, Nino. Tian's body could be described as well proportioned legs for squatting with a long back and relatively normal length arms. Nino's body could be described as essentially the opposite of this. Nino possesses long legs, long arms and a relatively short torso. This essentially poor build for weightlifting has not stopped Nino from becoming one of the generation's best weightlifters. Nino is known for his power and speed in weightlifting due in large part to his very impressive squatting ability, which we haven't seen the upper limits of just yet. The best we've seen from Nino has been a very casual double at 270 kilos and a relatively easy front squat of 250 kilos. Nino is a great example of someone who has built a very impressive squat despite his unfavourable leverages for squatting. What's even more useful is that we can actually see some of these changes made over time via his social media, and we can see how this has improved the quality of his squat. The first change Nino has made to his squat is the adjustment of how wide he stands. So generally when we look at people who have longer legs, we will often see them run into the issue of how far their knees can travel over their toes. Now this is important because if we have inadequate forward knee travel, we will see an unfavourable change in the back angle during the squat. If the knees don't travel forward enough over the toes in the high bar squat, this will force a forward tipping of the torso angle, which will of course lead to either missing of the squat due to a forced bailing or due to unfavourable loading of the posterior chain by increasing the length of the moment arm, aka your back. Lifters with longer legs will often experience this issue due to unrealistic demands on the ankle dorsiflexion while squatting with a normal back squat stance. Lifters with shorter femurs will often have an accompanying higher quality of dorsiflexion. Longer leg lifters do, however, have a second option to combat this lack of proportional dorsiflexion. They can widen their squat stance, which allows them to reduce the amount of forward knee travel while allowing the hips to sit in between the heels. This will then allow us to maintain a more upright back angle with less effort, increasing the quality of our squats. If we look at an older video of Nino squatting, we can see him squatting with a more narrow stance and struggling to maintain an upright torso. However, if we look at some of the more recent squats, we can see he has chosen a wider squat stance, which is allowing him to more easily maintain an upright torso angle. This does, however, still require some dorsiflexion, so unfortunately you will still need to work on this area and simply cannot get by without it. An additional part of Nino's squat that is also worth using is similar to Tian Tao's last week, and that is the amount of external rotation of his toes. Nino possesses a slight turnout of his toes, and this allows for less demand of dorsiflexion on the ankles while still allowing for more than adequate use of the quads in the squat. If you do decide to try a wider stance, please do allow for some adjustment period to get used to this new squat stance, as it can often be more demanding on the hip mobility and potentially on your abductor strength of the hips. The second notable aspect of Nino's squat technique is how he achieves a good upper back position and shoulder position even though his arms are exceedingly long. Many athletes who are in inverted commas longer or who have longer arms will tend to have an excessively wide grip combined with an overly extended wrist and will fail to develop the necessary tension in the upper back and shoulders to maintain a good upright back posture. This often results in the upper back rounding forward, or it often results in the elbows moving around a lot as they stand up out of the squat position. If you're in a position where you have longer arms, the easier option is to simply scoot out the grip and not deal with the role of discomfort or somewhat temporary pain of bringing in your grip and maintaining a tight shoulder position. This lack of stability and lack of rigidity in the shoulders is definitely a negative aspect of many taller lifter squats. Another aspect which should be accounted for in taller or longer lifters is the relatively difficult or relative intensity in which they are regularly squatting. In athletes who are well built for squatting, you can often see athletes grinding out more difficult squats or squatting at higher relative percentages and their positions not necessarily breaking down too much. When the barbell moves more slowly, they might be slightly thrown out of position and they will achieve the rep no matter how grindy or difficult it may look, and they'll achieve it quite safely. For those lifters in the taller or longer category, they will often have to squat with a bit more of a more sensible approach to loading. One aspect of Nino's squat programming is he tends to squat with weights which always look easy. He almost never moves the bar slowly, and we rarely see him being pushed out of position or falling forward as he stands up in the squat position. So for those lifters who are a bit taller, you would certainly want to think about squatting at a slightly lower relative intensity or just a slightly lower level of difficulty to ensure the positions are always perfect, as this is something which the perfectly built squatter might not have to think about as much. A good way of training this upper back posture is by mimicking this position in your pulls. If we look at Nino's pulls, we'll often see him maintaining a very upright and arched position during the pulls. This arch position is more exaggerated than it would be in his back squat, for example, but it does, however, allow us to train the extensors of our back. Additional exercise work is very useful for this, such as horizontal rows or barbell rows, but due to the nature of back squats being so heavy, the like-for-like use of heavy weights in the pulls does allow us to maintain this posture a little bit better in addition to the aforementioned assistant work. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If there's a lifter or squat you would like us to look at, we will be moving away from weightlifters. But if you'd like us to look at any video or any squatter and break it down a little bit, please leave them in the comments below and we'll be happy to get to them. Today's video is of course brought to you by the Seek a Strength Road to Your Back Squat program. It is 8 weeks in length, 2 sessions per week, and it is notoriously difficult but notoriously productive.